our presentation today is continuing bonds, and as I said, particularly with the thought in mind of Christmas and the time of year that we're in, and how that might be something that we can support people with. So what we want to do today is talk about, you know, sort of what are continuing bonds? What does that phrase mean? What are the practical ways that we can support people with their continuing bonds after somebody has died? How can we support children and I guess in particularly grandchildren and maybe even great-grandchildren in that, and how can we support them with those continuing bonds? As I mentioned earlier, particularly with Christmas in mind or the end of the year. And you know, how can we do that for everybody, I guess, in the best way possible, or in a way that feels supportive to them and appropriate for them and right for them? Because obviously I want to caveat that, you know, this may not be for everybody. This may not be something that they feel particularly wanting to connect to, but for those that do, maybe there's an opportunity to share some really creative ideas about how to do that, and everybody just finding the thing that fits best for them. Before we move on to continuing bonds and what continuing bonds are, what the theory is of continuing bonds, we just want to I guess, draw a little bit on the funeral timeline. So, of course, for some people, there is a little bit to talk about with families. If somebody has got a diagnosis and they have the opportunity to talk with friends and family about what they would like for their funeral, what's important to them, what they would like to have carried forward, if you like, in a continuing bonds kind of way, there's an opportunity for them to share that with people. But in the time before the funeral, after somebody has died, there's an opportunity to just maybe gently broach the idea of, you know, some things that people might like to consider that might be helpful to them moving forward or going forward in terms of their bereavement and their grief. And they might want to include some of those things within the funeral itself. So the funeral event, and that might be particularly being creative around the coffin and decorating the coffin or coffin choices. It might be about being creative and sharing photographs and words and music and stories, and having the opportunity just to share that with the wider audience who are attending. It might be about giving a gift to people at the end of the service. So the idea that you give a funeral favour, something that will be given to people so they can remember that person. It might be some wildflower seeds. It might be some bird seeds if they were particularly interested in nature. It might be a favourite chocolate or a biscuit. It might be a bookmark. You know, there are many things that people might want to consider. I'd like to give that as a gift to those who've come, and in memory of the person that we're here to celebrate the life of. And those are a way of continuing a bond with that person who's died, because you're giving them a little bit of something that they'll take away and remember very fondly, I'm sure. The time after the funeral is perhaps when people start to then think about what their post-funeral rituals may be. And of course, the time leading to the funeral is a very busy time. We're busy with all the practical things we have to do, the sharing information with family and friends, all of those practical tasks that have to happen. But the time after the funeral, we have a little bit more time and space, don't we, to just, I guess, gather ourselves a little bit and maybe think about, you know, what we would like to do as part of that ritual. And then as the anniversaries come, whether that's a birthday, a wedding anniversary, the anniversary of somebody's death, the anniversary of a funeral, perhaps, then that might be the time where people think about, well, actually, we'd like to do this. And it may then become a little bit more of a ritual that happens every year, annually at those times. And I guess my own personal example of that is that I have a bench for my mum in Pudsey Park. So on her birthday and at Christmas, I go and take flowers to the bench and have a few moments where I can just sit and have a quiet contemplation. It overlooks a wildflower garden. But we also have Chinese food on her birthday and on the anniversary of her death, because for whilst she never really she liked sweet and sour chicken, but then didn't like garlic, but then always wanted the bean sprouts that were laden in garlic. So it's a bit of a chuckle point in our family that we have to have Chinese food with bean sprouts, even though she didn't like garlic. It's like she didn't really realise it had garlic in it. So that's our little ritual, and we do all those things at those particular times of the year. And if I forget, or not forget, but if I kind of like gloss over it a little bit, I get a little prod from my daughter who's like, hang on a minute, it's time for the Chinese food. Where's the Chinese food? So it's definitely become embedded in our rituals that we have, for sure. But certainly the time after the funeral is that time where we have that chance to just maybe time and space to just think a little bit about what we want to do and what feels really important or really powerful for us, and how we want to continue to do that going forward. So continuing bonds is a theory, and it was first brought up in a book called Continuing Bonds, Another View of Grief in 1996. And in some ways, what the continuing bonds theory does is it challenges some of those more traditional or more models of grief that we're more familiar with, that those models that suggest that we need to detach ourselves from the person who's died and that we need to move on. And I'm using the words detached a bit like this in speech marks, you know, and that we need to move on. And the model of the continuing bonds model, continuing bonds theory, that suggests that we find a way, albeit maybe very slowly, we find a way that we adjust and we redefine our relationship with that person. So we understand that our relationship with that person has changed because that person is no longer physically with us. But in a very normal and healthy way, we redefine that relationship with somebody as to how do we continue that at their memory? How do we continue our relationship with them? How do we continue to think about them and talk about them in a way that just allows us to continue that? Because our relationship with that person will invariably remain equally as strong in death as it was in life. And it's a concept that is quite intuitive to grievers, I guess. We know that we want to continue that bond. We know that we want to just remember them in our way, and we want to do something that recognizes that that's what we're doing. And, you know, it's quite intuitive, isn't it, to do that? But it has a name and a title, and we call it the continuing bonds theory. And it certainly encourages us to continue with those relationships, but in a way that is slightly different, obviously, to the way that it was before. And they can be equally as strong. And that's where the rituals come into it, isn't it? It's the development, supporting the development of those bonds. And it can take place at any point in our grief process, in our grief journey, in terms of what happens with us. And it's something that you might choose to do on your own, or it might be something that you choose to do within a smaller group or in a larger group. You know, I think all of this is very personal to somebody as an individual. And how often those rituals take place, again, is very individual to them. It might be that they want to do that something daily, weekly, annually. If you think about on a daily basis, you talk to people who find themselves going up to the cemetery every day because they want to go and talk to the person that they're grieving, and they go up to the cemetery every day to do that. Or it might be that somebody does something on a weekly basis. Again, I guess the cemetery is probably the easiest example of that. They might go up weekly to change the flowers and to do something around the grave and tidy it up. Somebody might do something annually, and again around anniversaries, as I've suggested, is how we do it. It's sort of in our house. So, you know, it's very important to emphasize that this is a very much an individual and personal thing, isn't it? And it's about supporting somebody to be able to do that in a way that is right for them. And in the idea of continuing bonds, I guess most people will be familiar with the idea of headstones and ashes. And we're going to talk about those in a little bit more detail. And I guess more and more people are becoming aware of the opportunity to have ink fingerprints taken and be looked after by the funeral director or family member, and locks of hair, and what can we do with those, and how do those support us with our continuing bonds? And again, we'll come on to those in slightly more detail in a moment or two, if that's okay. So, ashes. Ashes are a part of my role, I guess, that I had not really thought about the meaning, I guess, or the importance or the value, I guess, of how significant that moment is when you pass ashes on to somebody, because it's a really, really powerful moment in somebody's grief journey. And what people then want to do with those ashes will vary and differ for absolutely everybody. And some people will automatically know what they want to do, and maybe because they've been told, you know, I want you to take my ashes to, or I want you to wait until my partner dies and I want you to do something together. And there may be very, very clear instructions. Sometimes there's no very clear instructions at all. It's a very intuitive thing amongst the family members about what they would like to do. And again, Some people would say, well, we want to keep all of the ashes together, or some people would want them to be split so that they can take some ashes to different places or different locations, or different family members can have some. And some people may want to keep some back so that they could have some put into jewellery. There's some very creative things that you can do with ashes, and I've got some pictures of those that will come a little bit later. Ashes can be interred, so they can be interred or buried into a grave, either a grave that already exists or a grave that's going to be purchased for the purpose of burying them, and then people may want to put a headstone there, and again it's a place to go and visit. Other people may want a little bit in a keepsake. So you see there's a picture of a lady holding a green stone, that's called a cuddle stone, and you can put a small amount of ashes into those, and they're a very tactile thing that you can hold in your hand or hold very close to you, and think, well, you know, they're here with us. And some of the other examples are, you can, like the big heart, you could have some ashes in the big heart, or you could put some into the little one, and the little one can be detached, and again you can just hold that in your hand, and that feels quite a consoling thing, I guess. Somebody might want them in something quite ornate and have it as a sort of as a feature in their home. Other people may choose to scatter them somewhere, or have them place them on water. And obviously there are some cultures that the placing on water is an important part of their ritual after the funeral has happened. And there's a number of different ashes caskets or urns that you can use to do that, and your funeral director should be able to help with that. So, and there's, I'm going to come on to some pictures of other things that you can do, but just to give you a feel for things, there's art, there's jewellery, into resin, into space, and fireworks. You could take a small amount, I guess, and you could plant near a tree or with a rose. Again, we have some of that in a planter with a rose in my mum's name, and we have some in there so that if we moved house, we could take it with us. There is a company you can take the whole of the ashes to a company who can incorporate it into compost and ensure that the pH is right, and actually have a tree planted using the compost that has had the ashes incorporated into it. And they're a local company in Leeds who can do that. So again, it just offers some versatility around what's possible. And the more we talk about these things, the more people have an awareness of what's possible and what they might like to do, and can ask the questions of the funeral director at the time and say, you know, well, how can we help to do this? Headstones are a ritual, a continuing bond ritual, I guess, that everybody will be very, very familiar with. And I think the important thing to understand about headstones and cemeteries is that whoever owns the cemetery is likely to have some fairly clear rules and guidance as to what's acceptable within their cemetery. So it's really important that people check with them. And stonemasons, for example, are really key at understanding the different requirements by the different councils and the permits that are needed and required. And one of the things I think that people consider when they're thinking about having a headstone in place is the design of it. And the design can be really personalised to the story of somebody's life, for example, and have that incorporated in it in some way. And there's some really excellent stonemasons who spend a lot of time with families just listening and hearing and understanding the story, putting some designs together and saying, you know, what do you think to this, tweaking it a little bit, and then having it exactly as you wish. I mean, I particularly like the one that's on the right of the screen with the leaves across the headstone. I think that's absolutely beautiful. And you can clearly see from Nicole's that cycling was perhaps a huge feature of her life. And it certainly was reflected in her funeral, her love for cycling.
You're right.
Oh, hello. And is it possible to mute Jade? Another thing, I guess, that people would consider is if the grave is to be used for somebody else in the future, they might want to leave some space on the headstone so that the next inscription can go along underneath or alongside. So, and you know, there's something really powerful, isn't there, about being able to go to this place and to decorate it in a way that you wish, with flowers and other personal items, have that ritual of going at times that you feel that you want to, and creating that ritual and that bond with somebody by going to that place and visiting. And headstones and cemeteries are not just for full graves, as in for a coffin grave, but also there are areas in those cemeteries for just ashes to be buried or interred. And you can have headstones placed there as well. So it's another consideration that when somebody has a cremation, perhaps they may wish to have the ashes interred somewhere, in which case there's the possibility of being able to have a headstone. And as I say, we need to be very mindful of the rules that exist in the individual places where those will be. So I mentioned earlier about the opportunity for ink fingerprints and handprints, and this is because they lend themselves rather beautifully to being made into jewellery or into a, as you can see on the right hand side, that's a handprint in clay that has then been painted in silver, or you can have it in bronze and then have it put in a frame. And whilst the picture might not show very clearly the level of detail you do get a good level of detail there. And the fingerprints, I think it's one of those things that people, it's a bit of a Marmite question, I guess. Would you like would you like us to do this so that you can have them going forward? And it's an opportunity for us to take the prints and then keep them safe. And it might not be that people think immediately that that's something that they want, but actually maybe 6 months, a year down the line, significant events in a person's life, whether it's an 18th birthday, 21st, wedding, whatever it may be, actually, people come back to us and say, I'd like to give the gift of a piece of jewellery with the fingerprint of the person's mum, for example, and an inscription on the back. And we'd help them to do that, and then they can give that as a gift at a significant time. It's one of those things, as I say, I think at the time people are not so sure about, but it is an opportunity to do that, keep them safe, and then at some point going forward in the future, if they would like it, then they know that it's there and it's possible. And the people who make these, they're evolving their techniques with it all the time. So for example, one organisation that we work with, they can now take somebody's handwriting and have the inscription in their handwriting. So if you send them an image of an example of their handwriting, they can use that as an inscription on the back. So again, it just personalises it a little bit more and just keeps that bond going a little bit further, doesn't it, where you've got their handwriting quite close to you. Jewellery is quite visible, and sometimes that's not necessarily where people are at. So for example, a necklace with a heart and a fingerprint on could be quite visible to people, and would therefore perhaps invite questions from somebody about, oh gosh, what's that? And you might not feel able to do that or answer those questions. And they do things like key rings. And I do remember speaking to a lady who had a key ring because she could keep that in her pocket, and they're very tactile, these pieces of jewellery, so she could just touch the jewellery in her finger in her pocket and not feel that she had the possibility that people were going to ask her questions when she wasn't quite ready to answer them, but she could hold her husband's fingerprint close to her by having it in her pocket, which I thought was a really lovely way of thinking about what was really important to her and what she wanted to do at the time that this was something she wanted to do. So I thought that was a really lovely way to do that for her. So yeah, just one of those things you can do. Locks of hair. It's quite perhaps a Victorian, I guess, tradition of maybe having some locks of hair in a locket around somebody's neck. And we certainly take lockets of hair from babies, don't we? So it's, but people, when we say about locks of hair, people look at us and say, well, what do we do with it? And of course, you might want to have it, just keep it safe in a little trinket box. You might want to have it incorporated into something, and there are things that you can do. And you can see that these are jewellery pieces that can be made. So the ones on the left are some resin pieces that our colleague is really fantastically creative and imaginative about, and can create some of those beautiful pieces. And you can have them in resin, and as you can see, that's sort of a Pandora bead style resin piece with lots of hair in, and you can have it incorporated into other jewellery pieces as well. And again, it's a bit of a Marmite question. Not everybody really wants to do that, but if it means that we can look after them until such point that somebody decides that they think they do want to do something, then at least we can offer them that opportunity as and when. Other rituals of supporting continuing bonds. I think I alluded to it a little bit, I guess, with my example in our family, but places and objects. Is there a place that people go to that is part of the continuing that bond, whether that's a daily walk, with taking the dog for a walk, whether that's a particular holiday location, a particular place where it was just nice to go and visit and sit and chat and put the world to rights. Objects could be absolutely anything, couldn't it? I guess in that offers continuing bonds. An example, I guess, that my mum collected elephants, so we have over 200 elephant ornaments when we had to sort her house out, and we've got a number of those at home. So we have many of her items and objects that we keep as a little bit of a memento, I guess, to remind us of her ones that are her favourites. Dates are really important, aren't they, and significant? Again, not for everybody. Some people, there are certain dates they would prefer not to remember and so don't. And there are other dates, there are other people for whom dates is really, really important. And it might be on those dates they do something of particular significance. Food, sort of alluded to it slightly, but the beautiful chocolate cake there is a reminder of a ritual where somebody makes the cake, the relative's favourite cake, and there is an opportunity to just talk about her and talk about her cake and all the fondness that goes with the opportunities to do that. And it allows, I guess, perhaps younger members of the family who may not have known the person to say, what's this cake? Who's this cake for? What do we make it for? And you can, the adult in the room can say, we're making this for grandma, and it was her favorite cake, and this is, as the adult's grandma, and I know you didn't know her, but this, we talk about it all the time, but this was her favorite cake, and we're making it today because today was her birthday. There are things like that. Food's a really powerful thing as well, isn't it? And moving on to powerful things, music, words, and art. My goodness me, particularly in the funeral, we talk a lot, don't we, around, music. What music would you like to have? Because music is really emotive and really powerful, and people have favorite songs, favorite lyrics, favorite artists, and it's important that those are played and recognized. Makes it really hard, doesn't it, to listen to those pieces of music again when we've heard them at the funeral, but in the spirit of it being somebody's favorite choice, and that's what they wanted, that's what we do, don't we? But music is really emotive and really powerful, but also allows us to continue our bonds with somebody, because you hear a piece of music, and for whilst it might make you cry, it's an opportunity to say, do that was their favourite song, they really loved that artist, and we saw them in concert, or we've got all their albums, or this was their favourite. And it's that, because I think the key that runs through all of this is communication and talking, and the opportunity to talk and share. And as many of us know, after a bereavement, those opportunities become less. But what continuing bonds do is allow us to continue those conversations in a really safe way, because talking about food and music and words and art is quite a safe space to do that in, isn't it? Words, whether that's poetry, writing a tribute or a eulogy at a funeral service, journaling. Journaling is a really cathartic way of supporting us in our grief and continuing our bond with somebody. And whether we keep those journals and keep those, or whether some people talk about writing a letter and then maybe putting it over a candle and just letting all of that go within the space of the flame. But words are really, really important, aren't they? Art. Did somebody have a favourite piece of art? Do you do something creative after our bereavement and in our grief and in our loss? Does it draw us to want to create something artistic? Do we commission something? And again, I'm going to show you some examples of that. But certainly art after loss is a theme that we've been working with this year, and have had an exhibition of that in the Harrogate area. We'll have another one going forward. But the art that comes from loss is just beautiful, and it's really powerful, and it's really cathartic, and it gives other people a chance to look at it and say, that really resonates with me, and I'd like to talk about the person that I've lost and what that means to them. And again, it's that continuing idea that communication is key, and being able to talk is really powerful. We might also do some memory making activities that I'm going to come to a little bit later on. And creating a legacy, you will perhaps see on television or on social media or in the newspaper, people who have created a charity or a foundation or a movement, particularly in memory of the person who's died. And it will invariably be for a particular cause. So whether somebody has perhaps maybe wants to raise awareness of mental health issues, wants to support a particular health charity and creates a foundation that goes on to support them, all of those things, or maybe create something in sport, you know, all of those things, creating a legacy continues to keep that person very much in our thoughts and our minds and our memories, and talking about them and saying we're doing this in memory of them and for them, and raising money in the meantime, raising the profile of a particular organisation, charity, or particular theme that's really important to that person and that family. And that's a really powerful way of continuing our bond with the person who's died. So many possibilities. This is the title of this slide. So no words, but just lots and lots of possibilities in pictorial form. The steam train that you can see there reflects the gentleman's love of locomotion and steam trains, and there was an opportunity for his ashes to go into the furnace of the steam train, and then as you can see, go along the train journey on a beautiful spot with the family who were able to be there. Again, you know, perhaps not something everybody might think about doing or wanting to do, but it's certainly there as a possibility. The frame with the blue and the green and the two silver, that's ashes into glass. So some ashes have been made into an glass art piece. And again, perhaps, you know, have it on display in your home, but would people necessarily know or recognise? But you know that that's what it is, and that there are the ashes that are in there. The garden bird bath, in the core of that is where an opportunity to have ashes in there. So you can have an inscription on there. You have they have the ashes in there, and that could be in somebody's garden. Again, perhaps some people may not recognise or know that that's what's in there, but you do, and the birds, you would have the opportunity to come feed or water from there. The last picture on the front, on the first row, sorry, on the right-hand side, is a vinyl. So ashes can be put into vinyl and have your record played with the ashes. So that's quite a special thing, isn't it? Creative art, you know, again, I think the next sort of three at the bottom kind of create that, you know, an opportunity to put flowers from the funeral or somebody's favourite flowers into a frame, or dry them and put them into a frame, and have that as a sort of, you know, a significant piece of memory, if you like, going forward. An example of the art after loss, and then ashes into space, and you can have fireworks or into space, and there's companies who can help to do that. So as I say, title gives it away, really, doesn't it? So many possibilities. Children, how can we support and how can we involve children in all that we do, and help them with their memories of, because children really worry, don't they, that they won't remember somebody, or they'll forget what they look like, or they won't remember what they sound like. And they worry, sort of the sort of training we've had with Child Bereavement UK has taught us that you know, children worry that they're not going to remember. So being able to involve children or support children in a creative way helps to reinforce those memories, and certainly by talking about the person helps to reinforce those memories. So certainly words, and it might be that it's talking about reading a favourite storybook together. If you know, it's a favourite book that was read with a parent or a grandparent, and you have the opportunity of that, writing things down, putting things into a letter, or creating a poem. All of those are opportunities to be creative. And I think as adults, we sometimes we worry about, will we be able to handle those conversations with the children, or when they want to broach that, are we going to be in a good place to be able to do that? And it's a tricky thing to navigate, and people worry about, you know, worry about it for themselves, they worry about it for their children, and they worry that they might not be able to handle it. And I think those are all really, really valid worries, aren't they? And how can we then make that a little easier on people, so that we can encourage those conversations, allow children to express what they're feeling, ask the questions that they want to ask? Because as we know, children will ask you a very direct question, possibly in an opportune moment, and will want the answer there and then. And but if we create an opportunity for you know, some creativity, it allows us to do something in a very creative way, where we sit alongside somebody, it allows conversation to flow in a more natural way, and we maybe will feel less it may feel like a less difficult situation, I guess, to have those conversations in. Pictures, the opportunity to draw, come back to the art thing again, don't we? The opportunity to draw, colour something in, sitting alongside somebody and just talk is really important. Sand jar memories, these are given a jam jar or a small jar, some coloured sand, different coloured sand, so say maybe yellow, red, green or blue, or multiple ones, and you would maybe say, you can say to the child, here's your things, little bags of sand, and when you have a particular memory about, I'm going to use grandpa as an example, when you have a particular memory about grandpa, I want you to put the sand into the jar and sort of think to yourself or say out loud, this is reminding me of that time when. And then you layer the sand, and the jam jar can sit by the child's bedside or in their room. And every time they look at it, they can think, oh, that yellow reminds me of. And it may make us sad and it may make us cry, but we know that that's really healthy, don't we? And that, but we also know when to recognise for the signs of actually when that may not feel as healthy, and we might need to reach out for some support. So just want to again caveat that with, there will be certain circumstances or situations or individuals where we need to look for additional support. But in the absence of not needing that, I guess, just to say that these are some things that you might do that might help to promote those continuing bonds. And I've got an example picture of the sand jar. So when I've given out sand in jars, I've sort of said, yellow might remind you of going to the beach and having a really fun day at the beach, and the green might remind you of going to the park and being pushed on the swing or getting an ice cream from a particular favourite park, and the blue might remind you of your favourite football team and going to football matches and doing that together. And red might remind you of a particular funny Christmas game or something that might just, so you can have those ideas of what the sand might remind you of. Memory bears, you can see the picture of Wilbur, our Wilbur there, sat on the sofa with a cushion behind him. So Wilbur is made from the clothes of somebody who has died, and there's some very talented people around who make the most beautiful, beautiful bears from the clothes and blankets and pillows cases and things like that. So sorry, my computer's just said the battery's running low, but it's plugged in, so that's interesting. I'm just going to move slightly. And the bears are great because they allow us to have the clothes made into something really, really special. The ladies who make them can put some embroidery, some stitching on there that kind of puts somebody's name on, or says in loving memory. It might say that if somebody's belonged to a club or something and they've got some clothes that have emblems or logos on, they often use those on them as well. So it might have somebody's golf club logo on there as well, and that's an opportunity. And people do these are really accessible because they cost maybe between 20 and 30 pounds, and they're super accessible to everybody. And people might have them made for multiple family members, and give them again as gifts at certain times in the year. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the memory bears, as you might be able to tell. Memory pebbles, I've got a picture of that which I'll show you just shortly. But again, it's an opportunity to draw and be creative on the pebbles and put the pebbles in a jar, and you can put, either keep them in there or add to them as you go along, or pick them out and talk about what that particular drawing on that memory is bringing out for you. And it allows children the opportunity to be really creative. Christmas fairy, so you can see there's an image there of a Christmas fairy that's been created, and Christmas baubles, and I'm going to come to that slightly again in a little while, so I'll just leave that there for the moment. And you can see the fingerprint tree there, so this is an opportunity sometimes that maybe at the refreshments where you can ask people to put their finger into an ink pad and add to a tree of life with fingerprints on, and it's an opportunity again for people to have be creative and feel connected at a time of the funeral. So these are some sort of more pictures of the activities for children. So you can see the sand and the jars there, and the memory jar being held with some pebbles or some pebbles in there with some pictures on, so I can see some trees and a rainbow. The memory stars, again, is an opportunity for children to be creative, and we've used these where we've asked if the children would like to make one and then bring it to the funeral, and then they can have it and sort of wave it at the funeral. And the picture of the bauble we're going to look at again when we come to our slide around Christmas time. So stories and traditions around Christmas are really important, aren't they? We have those anyway. And I think, when somebody has died, we have the opportunity to continue those stories and traditions if we feel able to and that we want to. I was talking to a group of people yesterday who, for many of them, it's their first Christmas this Christmas, and actually they want to just move away from anything that they've ever done before, really don't want to the next couple of weeks to happen, but invariably know that it will. But they want to shy away from all of those things because at the moment it feels really, really painful. But moving forward, they may gradually start to think, oh, we used to do that, so I think we should do that today and for Christmas, and do that this year. So they may start new traditions, but they may also want to go back to traditions that they had. And I think that's the other key to this, isn't it? We take our time. It's about just slowly adjusting and redefining our relationship and what we feel able to do at the right time for us, and not being hard on ourselves, not pressurizing ourselves to be all things to all people, but knowing that we just need to work this out and feel comfortable with where we get to. Memory ones, a little bit like the stars that we said earlier for children, an opportunity to do something creative. Tree angels. So the baubles, if you have a empty bauble case that you can get from anywhere, such as Hobbycraft, clearly not naming anybody, but Hobbycraft, for example, or online, and you could just spend a little bit of time putting together some things that feel really personal and important to you in memory of the person who's died. So, for example, you might cut out a picture of them and put it inside the bauble so that it faces the outside of the bauble. You might then put in some other personal items that remind you of them, and it might be that there are feathers. There might be that you write a little note and you just roll it into a scroll and you put it in there as well. You might put in some bird seed or flower seeds. You can personalize these in absolutely any way you wish. And you might want to then hang it every year on your tree, or just have it hanging somewhere in the house that is just, that you recognise that that's what you've done for that person. We made some the other week at a support group, and the lady filled hers with yellow feathers because yellow feathers were a feature at her husband's funeral, and she wanted to put yellow feathers in, so that was really beautiful. Christmas decorations on the tree. So it might be that you have something that has always been a tradition that you've had on your tree that you continue with. It might be that you buy something that you say, this is in memory of them for this year, and we're going to have that on our tree. It might be that you have your own bauble and you place that on there and put that on there as well. So I guess there's many opportunities to be as creative as you wish. And this is a little bit of a crafting session, as you can see, making some memory baubles and putting those all together and adding them to a decoration, either the tree or somewhere else within the house. So plenty of opportunities.